every time you are asking kids to use their executive function skills that are weak for the moment, or you're adding stress, like, hey guys, this is a time test, and hey, this test counts toward your grade. You've reduced the cognitive space that you have to do the problem.
You're listening to Parenting with Impact, a podcast for parents like you, raising complex kids to become capable, independent adults, even in this complicated world. Each episode brings expert insights and real-life strategies to help you parent with confidence, calm, and clarity. Here are your hosts, Elaine and Diane.
Welcome back, everybody, to another conversation. This time we get to bring to you our longtime friend and colleague, Cindy Goldrich. We have known each other a very long time now.
Yes.
I think Cindy and I were in an initial ADHD training together a million years ago.
Yeah.
Ghost training. So
not
it's
that
great.
long, but a while ago.
It was
08, something.
Yeah, 08 or 09. Yeah, something like that as well. So it's a pleasure to have you as always. And today we're going to talk about education and ADHD because Cindy does a lot of work teaching teachers and teaching people to teach teachers and creating an environment in the school for students to really get the support they need when they struggle with ADHD. And you know, there are kind of two core accommodations that our kids need outside of those who use medication, meditation, whatever, activating the brain. And that's home accommodations and school accommodations. And there's a lot of focus on school accommodations out there. You know, the parent training work that we do and Cindy does some is all focused on home accommodations. But today we're really going to talk about what happens in a school environment and what's needed in a school environment.
Yeah.
So Cindy, tell us a little bit about how you got into doing what you do. What's a little bit of the backstory?
Sure. Well, like you, I've been doing parent coaching for years, and my parents would come back and they'd be, wow, this really works. Things are calmer. Things are great. But I go into the school and I tell the teacher, this is what's going on. It's really working. And teachers don't know what teachers don't know. And I have a warm spot in my heart for teachers. My daughter is actually an elementary special ed teacher. She co-wrote my second book with me. This is not about teachers care so much.
So much.
Teachers, it's not the highest paying profession in the world. There's so much stress, everything else. But many people are surprised to know that especially the gen ed teachers are not given any extra training about ADHD. And you guys know, as I do, we weren't even talking about executive function when we were first trained back in the, mid-2000, whatever year we called it.
We went through ADHD training.
It didn't even exist. So we know so much, but the teachers don't necessarily know. And one of the big things I always say is experience is not knowledge. There are a lot of teachers who have experience with kids with ADHD. They may even have ADHD themselves or their own child does, but that doesn't mean that they have the knowledge of understanding the neurobiology of ADHD, executive function, and how it all impacts learning, motivation, behavior, and the family system, as you guys know.
Well, and so I really want to reiterate what you're saying. Go back just a half beat because I think, and I know this was like it when I started out, we assume that teachers have this information.
Yeah.
We assume teachers are educated, that the school counselors are educated, that the school environment understands this. And the truth is that to your point, it's not that they don't want to be helpful. It's not part of their foundational education for general education teachers and to some extent for special ed teachers.
Yeah, no, I was in a teaching situation. I was with a group of teachers and the special ed teachers said they had maybe a half an hour twice around this sort of stuff. It was crazy.
I tell you that when my daughter graduated, my daughter has a master's degree. She's been teaching now for over 10 years as a special ed teacher. But when she first graduated, she sat in on my full day professional teacher training. And she said, Ma, I didn't learn any of this stuff. And she had gone to school as a special ed major.
Right.
It's not, and this was again 10 years ago, but even now, I travel the country going into school districts doing this, and the special ed teachers not only don't they necessarily know? But their gen ed teachers are leaning on them.
Right.
And so it's that double whammy. So they're so grateful to be getting this knowledge. But as I always say to all of the teachers, these kids live in the gen ed classroom. Most people with ADHD may have special education. In other words, they may have accommodations and modifications, or they may go to resource room or something like that. But the majority of their education is in the mainstream classroom. So that's the teacher that needs to understand all of this.
So the gen ed teacher gets virtually no education. The special ed teacher gets minimal education. The gen ed teacher is leaning on the special ed teacher. The parents start off leaning on all the teachers. And in my experience, I suspect you'll echo this, what ends up happening is you as a parent become better educated than all of them if you're really in here doing the work. And then you have to figure out how to become their educators in a very delicate way so that it's comfortable for them. Is that fair?
Well, and two variables to add into before I let you go loose on this, Cindy, but we know that ADHD is so variable. Like one flavor of ADHD is one flavor of ADHD. And so people are still walking around with a stereotype about what ADHD looks like or doesn't look like, add autism to the mix, all these other pieces of it. And Elaine, you alluded to this, the science is moving so fast. I think about when we go to the annual conference on ADHD, we learn like brand new stuff that won't even make it into the DSM for 20 years, let alone into the training for special ed teachers, let alone these teachers have been trained 10, 20 years ago. So it's a recipe for a challenge and an obstacle is what I would say. So
and an opportunity us to come in and change that.
I just want to say one very timely thing, Dan, about what you said, which is so important. Research. What many people don't realize is that without adequate research on the impact of certain training techniques, on the impact of what we know about what works and doesn't work with kids with neurodiversity is so important. Because think of the trickle down that exists, right? How are we going to prepare the next generation of teachers if we haven't been nimble enough to learn? So I actually sat in, I'm very involved in policy now. I'm getting more and more involved in that because I'm just so passionate about, I'll just say it right now. Could you imagine if every school district had an ADHD specialist? Doesn't mean that has to be their only job, but if you had a trained specialist, and that's what I do, if we had a trained specialist in every school district so that when new teachers come on board in the district, or when people need a refresher, or when they have that particularly challenging kid that they're just really struggling with, if you had that person, but think about the trickle down that's necessary. We need to fund some research so we can be more efficient and mindful about what's necessary. I was in on the, it's called the Council for Exceptional Children. It's a huge, wonderful organization that I belong to, and I'm on the policy with that. And we would talk about what do we need to be asking for? What do we need to be doing so that we can filter it down to help the students?
So there's so many directions, and I love the policy lens because part of what we know about practice is it takes innovation and practice to then become research, to then make it into process or established. So a lot of what's happened in the last 20 years since we've been doing this work is we now understand executive function in a way that we didn't 20 years ago. We understand the connection between that and ADHD. There's all this information we have, and it takes 15 to 20 years for that to get into practice, which is really what you're talking about from a policy perspective. Right?
Yeah.
So practically speaking, there's this long-term agenda of changing the way that school systems use this information. And the people listening are here right now.
Right. So what do we do for them?
So what do we do?
Well, it's kind of two parts of what do we do for them. One is is there something they can do to support on the policy front? So let's just say that if there is,
wrap that,
and then let's talk about the reality of having a kid in school right now.
So that we can maximize our time together, I'll give you the short-term, easy answer, which is email me. I'll send you a bunch of links and tell you some things you could do. I'll send you some articles and everything else. My email address, Cindy.
Well, let's put it.
So I'm going to let you do it, but what I'm going to say is give us the links and we'll put them in your notes.
I will do that too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Cindy at ppscoaching.com. And so that you're not getting barraged by 1,000 emails, we will get the information from you and put it in the notes.
You send that because there are things you could do. But the bigger issue for the people that are here now that want to help their kids now, and the teachers that want to help the kids now, there's a lot of, one of the, not to plug my book, but to plug the book, the one that's over there,
Right.
ADHD, Executive Function and Behavior in the Classroom. There are simple things you could do, such as make it normal for kids that need to move, but give them boundaries, give them appropriate, language around it, and help make it work for them. You can't have kids all bouncing off the walls and jumping and everything. We know that, but we can teach the whole class and not just have a spotlight on those kids because we all have times where we need to move. I'm on a swivel chair. I don't have ADHD. I like to just sit and work, right? But there are times where, I need to energize my body in a certain way. So we want to teach the whole class, okay, this is what fidgety is. This is why some people benefit from fidgeting at different times. Here are some ways you can fidget. But here's the thing. You can't be distracting. You can't be destructive. And if you're having trouble making that work for you, let's have some conversations around it in a private, appropriate way, and we'll make it work.
Right.
It's not hard.
So what I'm hearing is that we want to normalize for everybody that just this one example of movement, or fidgets and whatever it is to make sure that it is not disruptive for the classroom. And there are a lot of ways that can be done. The term that's coming up that I want to ask you to speak to is the notion of universal design, because this is one example and there are a million of them, right? Mm-hmm. So let's pull back and say what you're describing is if it works for our complex kids, it's going to work for everybody.
Exactly.
So talk a little bit about universal design and what that means.
Sure. Well, universal design is basically saying, let's create an environment where it's going to work for the majority of the people, right? Where we don't have to have special different things for everybody, but yet we have access to it. I go back to, I don't know if you remember Rick Lavoie.
Yeah. The baseball story.
Yeah. Baseball. He's got a bunch of those stories, but one of the stories he always told was leading to that fair does not mean equal. Yeah. Fair means giving everyone what they need. An example that he gave was if you shovel the walkway so that the kid with the wheelchair can get in, well, that means everyone can get in too. We don't have to worry about first doing the steps because the majority of kids go up the steps. You want to create an environment where, people are getting what they need, even if it means it's different.
And I want to just plug, because it's such an important concept, what you just said. Families deal with this a lot when we've got one kid with this that needs some challenge or accommodation and another kid in the same family that doesn't, and then one kid saying, but that's not fair. And, based on what you're saying, what I say to parents a lot is exactly this. You're all going to get your needs met and you're not going to have the same needs. Right. And so we want to look for how do we get the most amount of needs met with the least amount of friction, effectively, is what you're talking about. Right.
Exactly.
So can you give some other examples of how this might show up in the classroom, like this ability to move?
Well, yeah, that's what I was saying. Is there a short list of kind of, I don't know, it's necessarily accommodations, but classroom adjustments that could fit into universal design and specifically support ADHDers?
I understand the need for a list, and there's probably a list I could put together, but I think in terms of environment, right? I encourage teachers after they've done a full day training with me, we sort of say, okay, now I want you to go back and I want you to just look at your classroom as if you are now that kid that we've been talking about all day. And one of the things that they say is, wow, I've got so much on the wall. It's really chaotic and they don't know where, and it's overwhelming and the important things are getting lost. Or this has to be done at different grade levels, right? Or yeah, if I color code things, like wouldn't it be great if all the science information was, if I'm talking elementary school, if all the science information was in green and all the math information was in blue and things like that? Of course, there's going to be overlaps because as you're teaching math, you're bringing in English concepts and everything. I know that, but things like that. It's about looking at how am I talking? What about the kids' processing speed? One of the things I talk to teachers about is processing speed, right? That we all process at different rates, and some of it has to do with our neurobiology. Some of it has to do with our stress level at the moment, right?
Mhm.
Interest
Right.
level at the moment, everything. So we have to, it's not like a one size fits all kind of a thing. But something simple I tell teachers to do is, okay, let's say you're going to ask everyone who was the first president of the United States. Some kids, especially in the younger years, are going to immediately raise their hand, right? That's how we know who the smart kids are, right? They immediately raise their hand, right? But the reality is, maybe the other kid was really having some complex thoughts. Oh, it was George Washington, and I know the whole story about the Valley of the, like how he had to cross the thing, and he's having all these thoughts. But did he raise his hand yet?
Yeah.
No. So what if we do something as simple as say, okay, guys, I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about the answer. And then when I'm ready, I'll ask you to raise your hand. So I'll say, who's the president? Who was the first president? Okay, now raise your hand if you know. Because as soon as that first kid raises their hand,
Nobody else does.
it's not even just that, though, Elaine. The other thing is that the stress response happens for the other kid. Oh,
Yeah.
they already did. I'm too late. So I want to reduce the stress in the classroom.
Well,
Because
I
I'm
was
gonna
looking
take- I'm gonna-
I just gotta say, because when you say I'm gonna ask you to answer in a few minutes, what you're gonna see is the impulsive kids are gonna get
right,
ones who wait, and that's
at,
gonna be useful for the teacher to understand at first. Fair.
at first, but then they're gonna learn about this. Yeah, Diane, you were going to say.
No, what's coming up for me, just to build on the stress piece, because you've mentioned stress twice in the last like 5 minutes, is also, and I think a lot of teachers are doing this, but I want to put a plug in for it, teaching stress management and stress awareness and nervous system awareness and all that sort of stuff, and building that into the day to day. So you're doing relaxation techniques. So you're doing that sort of stuff so that we're not just teaching math and English, but we're also teaching, oh, you're this human and you might be overwhelmed by what's going on today.
Yeah.
I mean, so I'm going to put a plug in for that.
Well, I'll give you a quick, easy example of that. I was a consultant at a school district for years in New Jersey. And, I'd visit the classrooms and whatnot. And one of the teachers, when I went to visit, it was a third grade class, and it was the beginning of the class, and she had everyone up, and they did literally every day, they did 5 minutes of standing yoga. Didn't need mats or anything else, just standing yoga, and then went around the circle with I'm grateful for this, I'm grateful for this, I need this, whatever. Just real, like the whole thing was 5 minutes.
Right.
And she said on the days that she didn't do it, maybe they had an assembly right away, she said, you saw the rest of the day, the kids were just off. So
Yeah.
teachers worry about, I don't have time for that. But I say this, it's money in the bank.
Yeah.
Those minutes that you're spending at, doing these things are reducing the stress. I'll say it, stress a million times, reducing the stress enough that now they're not dealing with as many off-task behaviors. They've got more time to teach their curriculum.
And when you reduce the stress, and this is what we're not saying, but the process is that when you reduce the stress, you actually improve and increase a kid's receptivity to learn.
Yes.
And kids stressed out, they're not actually available to learning. And that's this connection that we have to keep making, both for parents and for teachers.
The analogy I use is, and I use this in my parent work, I use this in the teacher training, I have a balloon, right? And every time you are asking kids to use their executive function skills that are weak for the moment, or you're adding stress, like, hey guys, this is a time test, and hey, this test counts toward your grade. You've reduced the cognitive space that you have to do the problem. our job as parents and as educators is to keep that balloon inflated.
Yeah, I love that.
All that space.
Well, while you were talking, I was sitting and thinking, because I had a lot of stress anxiety as a kid because I had undiagnosed learning and attention issues, and severe, so much so that I got very sick. If a teacher has said, okay, everybody take a breath and let it out. Let me tell you, we're going to have a quiz. If I had just had that moment to reduce my stress before, I can imagine what a difference it would have made. And this is 45, 50 years later.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And the thing is, a lot of what we talk about is most applicable in those elementary school years. And, I do teacher trainings for the middle school and the high school too. You can do these things in the middle school, high school, but the kids are going all the different classes. But what gold if you do it in elementary school? Because then they have developed that habit for themselves and they know, hey, when I go into that next class, I'm going to just take a moment and go, and I
Yeah.
know why I'm doing that.
Yeah, which is key.
Right.
Right. Okay. So we have talked about policy and advocacy and our role as parents, as educators of teachers, and the importance of helping teachers get accurate current education. We've talked a little bit about executive function, and we'll have other parts of the summit that talked about that. And really what we've talked about is some basic tools and techniques that teachers can use that serve the whole classroom and also serve the people with ADHD.
Exactly.
The thing that I'm interested in talking about next, Cindy, see if it resonates with you, is what are some of the conversations for parents to have with teachers? There's always this conflict. There's always this sort of, I don't want to bother them. They're busy. They're whatever. What are some of the themes, or what are some of the approaches that you find are helpful?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to turn the question around a little bit first, but then I'll answer your question. First conversation you have is with who? Your kid.
Right.
You want to talk to your kid about what's working for you, like what's working for you in class, or maybe what's worked last year that's not working this year, or what do you wish was working, or where are you challenged? Because that's going to help inform you. Because so often parents go in like gangbusters to the teachers, like, I know my kid needs this, and they need this, and they need this, and then you get it, and then what happens? The kid's like, I don't want that.
Yeah.
I don't want that. So I need to get the kid on board first. But then to answer your question, yeah, go ahead.
We'll stay with that for a second, because there are going to be parents listening right now who will say, but my kid doesn't know they have ADHD, or I don't want to talk to my kid about it. Or there's this concern. So let's speak directly to this need to begin to involve our kids in their own advocacy early. And that doesn't mean they're talking to the teacher with little kids, but speak about that just a little bit.
I'll give you a ridiculous example, and you tell me if this resonates for you. When this is many, many years ago, when my sister was pregnant with her second child, and that child is now a parent, so we're talking many years ago, my mother said, well, don't tell Josh that you're pregnant because that may worry him and everything else. And we all looked at her like, you think he hasn't noticed?
Right. He's going to figure it out.
Same thing with your kid. Your kid may not have the language for it. You may not have opened up that conversation, but they know something's up. They know that they're going for testing and their friends haven't gone for testing. They know. And by not talking to them, you are missing the opportunity, but you're also having them be more stressed, maybe shame, that's another whole conversation we could have. But so I encourage parents all the time. I will support you in figuring out the language. I'll support you in figuring out the timing and all of that. But please, let's figure out how we can bring your kid on board.
Yeah, because they have a lot more information than we realize. And you don't have to ask, how do you think we should manage your ADHD? Right? That's not the question. It's really when you feel comfortable in a classroom, what are your teachers doing? Right? Like helping them get clearer, raising their awareness is really what you're talking about.
Safe is what we're talking about, making it safe for them to be who they are and speak their truth and ask questions.
You're normalizing struggle, right? And everyone struggles. Let's be clear. Even the smarty, even the smarties struggle, and these kids create stories that they don't. And
Exactly.
so I think that it's that sort of, okay, so what are you good at? What's hard for you?
Exactly.
Boost the good stuff, address the hard stuff if you want to, those sorts of things.
Yeah. But now to answer your question of what do you say to the teacher? You start by, first of all, knowing in your heart that this teacher's not your enemy, they're your ally. And if you ever lose sight of that, you're missing something. Listen, I had a teacher for my son who said, because she used to yell all the time at him. And he was never a behavior problem. He just had learning challenges and ADHD. And she would say, "Oh, I don't yell. I just speak loud." To some kids and not other kids, it's just, we know, right? But if I
Right.
went in from, that was the issue,
Accusation. Yeah.
wasn't going to get anywhere. You have to go in with, you know, I'm sure you've had other kids like this. What has been successful with them? Because then you're already learning, oh, well, maybe she hasn't had kids like my kid, or she really, this is an education gap for her. She doesn't know anything about what to do. And then you partner with them and you say, I have found that these are the things he's talking about that are really hard. What's available? What can we do? And you're wanting to get information rather than tell them what your solution is. Because I promise you, anytime, and you know this in the parenting world too, anytime we're giving someone else a solution where we haven't done the deep dive of what their concern is and what their perspective is and what they're already trying to do, we're not meeting them where they are,
Well,
right?
and not only that, it's just sort of there's this sense of the fact that they don't feel like we get how hard it is. I mean, and that's one of the things I want to say again. It's
Need to
hard
acknowledge.
being a teacher. It's
Yeah.
really hard being a teacher. And there are a lot of constraints. And so by saying, what can we do instead of will you do this? It speaks to creativity. It speaks to collaboration, all those things that we want so much more of in that relationship.
And it speaks to honoring them and their expertise as well.
Yeah.
Well, you started off saying experience is not education, right?
There
And
is
so
that
you're
knowledge.
is not knowledge, right? And so what you're identifying is that if we partner with them, we ask them questions, we acknowledge their experience. To what you just said, which I think is so poignant, is we can figure out what the knowledge gaps are,
Exactly.
right? And then we can begin to try to offer help instead of only expecting behaviors.
Yeah, because then I've opened the door to, because parents ask me all the time, well, how do I get them to, go to this webinar, read this book or whatever else? But if I've asked them and then I've seen that little opening of knowledge, I can say, I read an article about that. Would it be okay if I send you that article?
No,
Or,
no asking for permission, everybody.
Yeah.
Keeps
exactly.
asking and enrolling and treating them as a member of the team instead of setting expectations and then getting upset and demanding when they don't hit it.
Yeah.
Which is
Well, and
it's hard.
I would say a lot of parents end up in a place where there is this contention between them and the teachers because, you've started and you end up in a conflict. You end up in a situation where you feel like your kids' needs are not getting met. And going back to that, the language we use is assuming best intention.
Mm-hmm.
This teacher wants to do the best they can for your kid, even if it looks like they're not or they're not trying.
Yeah. And to be clear, of course there are exceptions. And sometimes the exception is because the teacher may be burnt out. Maybe the teacher's having a hard year with their principal. Maybe the teacher had
Stuff in their life.
something,
Right.
I'm not trying to be blind to the fact that, yeah, sometimes it's about the teacher. And if you're in that situation where you are doing your best and you are being kind and everything that we're talking about, and you're still not getting anywhere, then the next step is, okay, talk to the principal, talk to the guidance counselor, but be armed with compassion, always, but knowledge. In other words, hey, these are the questions I asked. These are the concerns I have. These are the responses I'm getting. Can you help me see what I can do to make this work? Because then one of a few things is going to happen. The principal may say, hey, yeah, I understand. Let me talk to the teacher. In any case, they're probably going to talk to the teacher. Or they may say, honestly, what you're asking for is not reasonable and realistic. I mean, again, as I mentioned, my daughter's a special ed teacher. We talk all the time, not about specific kids because we wouldn't break that confidence, but I just want to be clear about that. But we talk about like what is possible, what is not possible. And unfortunately, I've been in this long enough that I've seen parents go from whispering to me, my kid has ADHD, to my kid has ADHD, what do I do? So the parents have become a lot more knowledgeable, thank goodness, right? Yeah. But sometimes that knowledge is a little dangerous because then they go in and they expect, well, I know what my kid needs, they should get this, this, this. Well, that's not necessarily realistic, and that's not necessarily possible. And now the teacher's in a situation where they really are saying, no, I can't do this, this, and this for your kid. I wish I could, but I can't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's where our universal design and teacher training, all of those things come in.
Yeah. So I hate to stop, but we're actually overtime, which is fine. So, but let us tell people, so people can find out if you love what you're hearing from Cindy, and I'm sure that you do, you can find out all of her resources or at ptscoaching.com. And we're going to have that on the resources for you. She's got the ADHD Parent Coach Academy, the ADHD Teacher Training Academy. She does coaching in school service, and really does work all around the country to support parents and families and schools in specifically navigating ADHD in all kinds of arenas. And also is doing a lot more policy work, which I love. I found out that you joined the CHAD Policy Public Policy Committee right after I stepped off of it. So I'm thrilled that you're doing the work. And so Sydney will give us those resources, and we'll make sure to make those available for you as well. As we wrap the conversation, Cindy, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to make sure that we highlight, or is there anything we did talk about that you want to highlight before we kind of close the conversation?
Oh, gosh. Everything?
I know.
I would say some of the biggest takeaways are going to have to be talk to your kids, see what's working, what's not. And don't be afraid to talk to the teacher. And if you need guidance in doing that, but also if you are professional out there, please get trained in helping these kids. You don't have to be a teacher to do this. You could be a parent who's raised kids who feels like, I want to go help the teachers. You could be, you could be the speech pathologist. All the different professions can help, but teachers want training. They just need people to help train them. So
beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. Cindy, thank you for being an amazing colleague, for doing what you do, and for spreading the word.
All right. Thanks.
We'll talk soon. Take care.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.